Let's get started. Story number 1.
24, I moved into a rental house just outside of Richmond, Virginia. I had just started my first real job after college, communications assistant at a nonprofit, and the pay wasn't great. I needed a roommate badly. The house was a 3-bedroom split level with a half-finished basement, and the owner was renting it out cheap because she'd moved out of state and didn't want to deal with a property manager. The catch was that she wanted someone to move in immediately, and she wasn't renting room by room. So I signed the lease for the whole place and put out a listing to find a roommate as fast as I could. A girl named Elise responded. She was a year younger than me, 23, working in retail, looking for a new place after a breakup. Her message was brief and polite. She came by the next day to see the house, and I got a good vibe from her immediately. She was tall, athletic, with short cropped black hair and a straightforward way of speaking that made me feel comfortable. She didn't overshare, she didn't seem shady, and she brought a friend with her to the viewing, which made me trust her more. Like, she had people who cared about her. She moved in 2 days later with just a couple of suitcases and a futon mattress. Her room was on the main floor, across the hall from mine. We were both working a lot, so for the first month or so, we didn't hang out much. We'd occasionally have dinner together or chat in the kitchen while making tea, and it felt easy. She was private but not secretive. I liked that she didn't blast music or bring random people over. The only slightly weird thing I noticed early on was that she didn't seem to own much. Her room had no decor, no furniture beyond the futon, a lamp, and a laundry basket. Her clothes fit into one small dresser that she bought secondhand. When I asked if she wanted help getting a bookshelf or anything, she shrugged and said she didn't like to hold on to things. Fair enough. Then, after about 6 weeks, she asked if her friend Rachel could crash on the basement couch for a little while. Just a week, she said. Rachel had just gotten out of a bad living situation and needed a safe place to land. I wasn't thrilled, but I didn't want to be heartless. I agreed. Rachel arrived the next day. She was quiet, almost timid, and barely looked at me when we met. Her hair was dyed a washed-out red, and she wore layers of oversized clothes like she was trying to disappear. She never ate upstairs with us, never watched TV, never used the front door. I only saw her come up to shower once in all the time she stayed. Elise said she was going through a rough time and was sensitive to noise, people, etc. One night I came home from work around 9 p.m. and found Elise sitting at the kitchen table staring at her phone. She looked really off, pale, tense. I asked her if she was okay, and she just said, "Rachel left." I asked if something had happened, and she shook her head. "She left this morning and didn't come back. She does this sometimes." Her voice was flat. I figured Rachel had found another place to go and didn't want to say goodbye. It was weird, but I was secretly relieved. That night I dreamed someone was standing over me. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding. My room was dark and the door was closed, but I could have sworn I'd heard it creak. The next morning, Elise wasn't in the kitchen when I got up, which was unusual. She was always up early. I knocked on her door but didn't hear anything. I figured maybe she was sleeping in. At around 10 a.m., I heard a thump from the basement, like something had fallen. I was in the middle of writing an email, so I ignored it. But 10 minutes later, I heard it again, a heavier sound, like a body hitting the floor. I went down. The basement was always a little creepy. It had those half-sized windows near the ceiling that barely let in light, and the couch Rachel had been using was shoved against the wall. The air smelled stale. When I got to the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The couch cushions were torn open, foam guts spilling out onto the carpet. One of the basement walls, previously just a painted cinder block, had been scraped raw in a patch about the size of a small door. Claw marks. I backed up and ran upstairs. I called Elise's phone. She didn't answer. I texted her and told her there was something wrong in the basement. She didn't respond. When she finally emerged around 1 p.m., she looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red, and her hair was messy. I asked her if she had any idea what had happened down there. She walked past me, opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and said, "Rachel sometimes has episodes." That was all she said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when I heard footsteps, not just creaks from the floorboards. Actual footsteps, soft, slow ones. They were coming from the hallway. I froze. I stared at the gap under my door. Shadows shifted. Then a knock. Not on the door, on the wall, right next to my bed. 3 knocks. Slow and deliberate. I sat up. Elise? No answer. I got up, opened the door, and peeked into the hallway. Empty. I walked to Elise's door and knocked. No answer. I tried again. Hey, are you okay? Still nothing. I reached for the doorknob. It turned. Inside, her room was empty. The futon was made, but her phone was sitting on top of it, screen glowing. I called her name again. No response. I went back to my room, confused and unsettled. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. The next morning, I found Elise sitting on the back porch, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket. It was 45 degrees out. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me at first. "Did you hear it last night?" she asked. "Hear what?" She shook her head slowly. "Never mind." I should have asked more questions. I should have pressed her, but I didn't. I was too tired, and honestly, I was starting to wonder if Elise was having some kind of mental health crisis. Over the next week, things got worse. Lights started flickering in the house. I'd come home to find the kitchen drawers open, my shoes moved, small items, keys, my toothbrush, missing and then reappearing in weird places. I blamed Elise, then doubted myself. One evening, I heard her crying in her room. I knocked, asked if she was okay. She told me to go away. Later that night, I was brushing my teeth when I heard a voice behind me say, "It's not her." I spun around. No one there. I looked in the hallway mirror, and I swear, I saw someone standing behind me in the reflection. A girl. Red hair. Pale skin. Rachel. I turned around, heart pounding. No one there. When I looked back at the mirror, she was gone. I didn't sleep. I kept all the lights on in my room and sat in bed with my laptop open until sunrise. The next day, I confronted Elise. I told her I thought something was seriously wrong and I needed to know the truth. She didn't get defensive. She didn't lie. Instead, she said, "She's still here." I stared at her. "Elise, what are you talking about?" She looked down. "Rachel doesn't go away. She just moves." I asked her what that meant. I asked if Rachel had died here, if she'd done something to her. Elise just said, "She won't let me leave, and she doesn't like when people get close to me." That was when I decided to leave. I didn't care if it made me look crazy or rude or whatever. I packed a bag that night and went to stay with a friend across town. When I came back 2 days later with 2 friends to get the rest of my things, the house was empty. Elise was gone. Her room was cleaned out. No note, no messages. Her phone number stopped working. The landlord said she'd never received rent from Elise, only from me. The check I gave Elise to cover her half must have been pocketed. I filed a police report, but nothing came of it. No one by her full name, Elise Morgan, matched the ID she'd shown me. It might have been fake. There was no trace of a Rachel either. To this day, I don't know what happened. I don't know who Elise really was, or what she meant when she said Rachel wouldn't let her leave. All I know is that when I dream about that house, I still hear the knocks on the wall. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. And every now and then, when I wake up in a quiet room and stare into the mirror, I half expect to see a pale girl with red hair standing behind me. Story the end.
Story number 2.
It was the fall semester of my junior year when I found myself in a desperate housing situation. I'd been living in the dorms for 2 years and decided it was time to move into an apartment off campus to save money and have more space. But I procrastinated too long, and by August, almost everything decent or affordable was taken. A friend of mine forwarded me a listing she saw on a student housing Facebook group. A guy named Caleb was looking for a roommate to fill the second bedroom in his 2-bedroom apartment. The rent was cheap, the location was only a 10-minute walk from campus, and the pictures made the place look, well, not great, but livable. I messaged Caleb. He responded within minutes. His tone was polite, but a little stiff. He said he was a senior studying civil engineering and kept to himself most of the time. He mentioned that his last roommate moved out unexpectedly, but didn't elaborate. I asked a few more questions, and he answered them all reasonably, if briefly. I figured he was just introverted. I was more concerned with locking down a place before classes started. We set up a meeting, and I went to see the apartment that weekend. It was older, probably built in the late 70s, with that brown shag carpet and yellowish linoleum that always felt slightly sticky no matter how clean it looked. The living room was cluttered but tidy, the kitchen a bit dated but usable. Caleb answered the door in a gray hoodie and jeans, his face blank but polite. He was tall, pale, with short, unkempt brown hair and dark eyes that didn't seem to focus on anything for very long. The weirdest thing was how quiet the apartment felt, not just in the sense of noise, but like it lacked presence, like no one had laughed in it for a very long time. I ignored the vibe. I needed a place, and I told myself that people who live alone for too long sometimes just get a little weird. We talked for about 20 minutes, and I signed the sublease 2 days later. Moving in was uneventful. Caleb helped carry some boxes up, but mostly stayed in his room. He'd already furnished the living room and kitchen, so I only had to worry about my bedroom. I made it cozy with posters, a mini fridge, and some soft lighting. For the first week, everything seemed okay. Caleb wasn't talkative. We didn't become friends, which I was fine with. He spent most of his time in his room with the door closed. At night, I could sometimes hear him pacing. Not walking, but pacing. Slow, steady steps back and forth for hours. I chalked it up to stress. Engineering is brutal. I'd seen plenty of classmates turn into zombies by midterms. But then I started to notice things. The first thing that really unsettled me was the mirror. I had a full-length mirror propped up in the corner of my room, across from my closet. One morning, I woke up and it was gone. Just gone. Not fallen, not broken, completely missing. I thought maybe I moved it and forgot, so I looked around. Nothing. I found it later that day in the living room, leaned against the far wall facing the window. I didn't remember ever taking it out there. "Hey, Caleb," I asked that night while we were both in the kitchen. "Yeah?" He replied without looking up from the dish he was drying. "Did you move my mirror into the living room?" He shook his head. "Nope." "You sure?" "I definitely didn't put it there." He looked at me then, just for a second. "Maybe you were sleepwalking." I wasn't, but I didn't push it. I moved the mirror back and tried to forget about it. The next few weeks, I started locking my bedroom door at night. I couldn't pinpoint why. Nothing specific had happened, but I just felt watched, especially at night. I'd catch myself waking up at 3 or 4 a.m., heart racing with the sense that someone had just been in the room. The air would be cold, like the window had been open, even though it hadn't. Then there were the notebooks. One afternoon, I was looking for a can opener in one of the kitchen drawers when I found a small black notebook stuffed in the back. It wasn't mine. I opened it. The handwriting was cramped and aggressive, full of angry loops and slashes. It wasn't notes or homework. It was something else. The first page said, "I see it at night. It watches from the corner. It knows when I close my eyes." The rest of the pages were filled with similar fragments, repetitions, sketches of a tall, faceless figure, phrases like, "Don't trust the mirror," and "It wants a new face," scrawled again and again. I put it back in the drawer and didn't say anything to Caleb. I should have, but I was afraid of what I couldn't say. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of the front door unlocking. It was 2:12 a.m. I froze in bed, listening. The door creaked open. I heard soft footsteps. My bedroom door was locked, but I sat up and grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside the bed. The footsteps went past my room, toward the kitchen, then nothing. In the morning, Caleb was making toast like nothing happened. "Did you go out last night?" I asked. He shook his head. "Didn't leave my room." I knew he was lying. That weekend, he left to visit his parents. He said he'd be gone 2 nights. I took the opportunity to poke around his room, not to invade his privacy, but because I was genuinely scared. I had to know what I was dealing with. I wish I hadn't. His room was immaculate. Too clean. Bed perfectly made, no clothes on the floor, desk spotless. But when I opened the closet, I found a stack of notebooks identical to the one I'd found in the kitchen. Dozens of them. I flipped through a few. They all said the same kinds of things. Warnings, drawings, descriptions of the mirror thing and the shadow behind the door. Some of them even had dates, and the entries seemed to grow more unstable over time. One notebook was different. It had a name on the first page, Ryan. I blinked. That wasn't Caleb's name. I kept flipping through. The entries were calmer, more organized. It talked about moving in, starting school, liking the apartment. Then, about halfway through, the tone changed. "Caleb says not to look in the mirror after midnight. Says it shows you things." I heard scratching behind the wall again. He said it's just the pipes, but I don't believe him. I woke up with the mirror facing my bed. I always pointed at the wall. I think Caleb watches me sleep. The last entry was dated 4 months before I moved in. I put everything back exactly as I found it. That night, I barely slept. Caleb came home Sunday night and acted like nothing was wrong. But things felt different now, more hostile. I tried to avoid him, left early, came home late, stayed in my room, but the mirror kept moving. No matter how I positioned it, every few days I'd find it facing the door or the window or, worst of all, my bed. I tried getting rid of it, hauled it down to the dumpster. The next day, it was back in my room. I confronted him. I had to. "Are you messing with me?" I asked, cornering him in the kitchen. He looked at me like he didn't understand the question. "The mirror," I said. "You keep moving it. Why?" "I don't," he said. "Then who does?" He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "Sometimes it does it on its own." "What does that mean?" "It likes to be seen," he whispered. "If you ignore it too long, it gets mad." I stared at him. "What is it?" Caleb smiled, not warmly, almost sadly. "I don't know, but it follows." That night I woke up with a nosebleed. I never get nosebleeds. I stumbled into the bathroom, flipped on the light, and saw that the mirror, not my mirror, the bathroom mirror, was fogged up. But the shower hadn't been used. The sink hadn't run. It was cold in the room. There was a word drawn in the condensation. "Look." I wiped it away, grabbed my phone, and booked a motel. I packed a bag and left before sunrise. When I returned 3 days later with my dad and a friend from school to help me move out, Caleb was gone. His room was empty, like completely empty. No furniture, no notebooks, no trace that he'd ever lived there. The landlord had no idea he'd moved out. There was no forwarding address, no warning. He'd just vanished. I moved out that day. Weeks later, I heard a rumor from another student who lived in the same complex. She said the guy who lived in my old apartment before Caleb had disappeared too, just vanished, left everything behind. I asked for his name. It was Ryan. To this day, I never found out who or what Caleb really was, or if he was even his real name. But I still have nightmares where I wake up in my old room, the mirror across from my bed, something standing behind me in its reflection, watching, waiting.
Story number 3.
I moved to Boston the summer after I turned 26. I'd just gotten out of a long-term relationship and left my job in Syracuse to take a new position with a tech startup. Everything in my life felt transitional. My friendships, my sense of purpose, even my wardrobe. I remember showing up to that city with 2 duffel bags and a box of books, thinking I could rebuild everything from scratch. I didn't have the money for a 1-bedroom, and most apartments in the area were either laughably tiny or outrageously overpriced. So I posted on Facebook and Reddit that I was looking for a roommate. That's how I met Kara. She responded to my post with a simple message. "Hi, I'm also looking for a place and would love to team up. Want to grab coffee?" Her profile seemed normal. Mutual friends with 2 girls I went to college with, photos of her hiking in Vermont, a cat named Waffles. I figured she was safe. We met the next day at a cafe in Back Bay. Kara was sharp, friendly, and sarcastic in a way that made me laugh. She worked in early education, said she taught preschool, and was looking to live in a place with some light and peace. We clicked. Not in a best friends forever way, but comfortably. Like, this could work. We ended up signing a lease for the top floor of a brownstone in Jamaica Plain. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a narrow galley kitchen, and a weird sunroom that barely fit a futon. Rent was manageable, and the landlord was a quiet old guy who lived downstairs and didn't bother us. For the first few weeks, it was exactly what I hoped for. We took turns buying cleaning supplies, cooked separate meals, and traded Spotify playlists. She didn't drink, which was fine with me, and I rarely had anyone over. The only strange thing I noticed early on was that she was very particular about the front door lock. She'd triple check it at night, then again in the morning before leaving for work. If I came home and forgot to deadbolt it, she'd leave a sticky note. "Please lock the door. K." It was a little intense, but not unreasonable. Then I started noticing she never had people over. I don't mean rarely, I mean never. No family, no friends, no coworkers. I asked once if she wanted to come with me to a bar my team was going to after work, and she politely declined. "Too many people," she said. "I get overstimulated easily." Fair enough. Some people are like that, but then things started getting odd. One evening in October, I came home to find Kara sitting on the floor in the hallway outside her room, not crying or upset, just sitting, facing the wall, completely still. It startled me. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked. She looked over her shoulder slowly, like she just realized I was there. "Yeah," she said, "just thinking." I gave a weird little laugh and said something like, "Cool, cool. Walls are good for that," and went into my room. That moment stuck with me. It wasn't just weird, it was off. She hadn't even looked surprised to see me, like she was in a trance. 2 nights later, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was my phone, maybe a video autoplaying or a podcast I'd left on. But when I checked, my phone was dead. The whispering continued. I sat up and listened. It was coming from Kara's room. Not loud enough to make out words, but insistent, continuous. I knocked gently on her door. The whispering stopped. After a moment, I whispered, "Kara?" No answer. The next morning, I asked her if she'd been on the phone late last night. She blinked at me over her cereal. "No," she said. "Why?" I lied and said I must have been dreaming. That weekend, I noticed something else strange. Kara kept a small notebook in the kitchen drawer next to the scissors and masking tape. I only found it because I was looking for a Sharpie. The notebook was black, battered, and filled with page after page of short notes. I didn't mean to read it, but the writing caught my eye. "Don't trust the girl with the window." She saw me. I saw her. We never spoke. I can feel him in the crawl space again. Page after page of fragmented thoughts, dates, names I didn't recognize, words crossed out and rewritten. I stood there flipping through it, completely unnerved. Then I heard her come in the front door. I shoved the notebook back in the drawer and slammed it shut just as she rounded the corner into the kitchen. We stared at each other for a beat. I tried to act normal. She didn't say anything. Later that night, I woke up again around 2:45. This time I heard footsteps, not hers, not deliberate, dragging. I got out of bed and cracked open my door. Nothing in the hallway, but the light in the sunroom was on. I padded down the hallway, past Kara's room, and peeked into the sunroom. Empty, but the futon was flipped over, like someone had lifted it and dropped it. That's when I noticed the back door was unlocked. I stood there, frozen. I turned the lock and shut it. When I turned around, Kara was standing behind me, in the dark. I yelped and stepped back. She didn't even blink. "Why are you up?" she asked. "The door was unlocked," I said. "I thought I heard something." She stared at me. Probably just the wind. She walked past me, turned off the sunroom light, and went back to her room. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next day, I decided to work from home. I called in sick and stayed in bed, scrolling through roommate horror stories and trying to make sense of what I was dealing with. Kara left around 10 a.m. for work. Around noon, I got up to make lunch. I opened the fridge and froze. Every item on the shelves had been turned backward. The labels were all facing the wall. Every bottle, every jar, even the milk. My hands started shaking. I texted my friend Becca, "Do you think it's possible to live with someone who's not mentally well and not realize it until it's too late?" She replied instantly, "Yes. Why? Are you okay?" I didn't respond. That evening, Kara didn't come home. At first, I felt relief, like I could breathe again. I watched dumb comedies, ate takeout, and felt almost normal. Around 11 p.m., I went to bed. I woke up sometime later, completely disoriented. There was a sound coming from under my bed. A scratching. Not a mouse, not the building settling. Slow, deliberate scratching. I reached over and turned on my bedside lamp. The sound stopped. I sat up and leaned over the edge of the bed. Nothing there. I got down on the floor and looked underneath. Empty. Except something was written on the floor in red ink. Just 4 words. "She lets them in." I scrambled back and hit my nightstand. I slept on the couch that night with all the lights on. The next morning, Kara still hadn't returned. Her door was open. Her room looked the same, untouched. I texted her. No reply. At noon, I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up. A woman's voice. "Is this Aaron?" "Yes." "This is Detective Marsh with the Boston PD. I believe you live with Kara Jennings." My heart sank. "Yes." "I'm calling because she was found early this morning in Franklin Park. Unconscious but stable. She was taken to Beth Israel Deaconess. You weren't listed as an emergency contact, but your number was in her phone under House." I didn't know what to say. "She'll be okay?" I asked. "She's being held for psychiatric evaluation. She was disoriented, wandering barefoot, and repeating your name. That last part hit me hard. I thanked the detective and hung up. I should have packed up and left then. But something compelled me to stay. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, maybe guilt. I called the landlord and told him the situation. He told me he'd had trouble with Kara before. Quiet girl, but a little off, he said. Lived here once a few years ago under a different name, left in the middle of the night. I didn't even ask what name. I started moving my stuff out that week. On the last night in the apartment, I found the notebook again. This time, it was on my pillow. I hadn't seen it since the kitchen drawer. I almost didn't open it, but I did. The last entry was dated the night before Kara disappeared. It read, "She knows now. The door was never locked. I told them to stay out, but they never listen. They want her now." I dropped it and left the apartment immediately. I finished moving the next day and never looked back. 3 weeks later, I got a package with no return address. Inside was the notebook and a single Polaroid photo. It was a picture of me, sleeping, taken from the foot of my bed. Story, the end.
Story number 4.
It was supposed to be a fresh start. After moving across the country for graduate school, I found a shared apartment just a few blocks away from campus. The place was an old, slightly dilapidated 2-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a building that had clearly seen better days, but it was affordable, and in the end, that's all I really cared about at the time. The listing said the roommate, Vanessa, was a graduate student too, so at least we'd have that in common. When I first met Vanessa, she seemed normal enough, mid-20s, soft-spoken, not too outgoing, but polite. She gave me a quick tour of the apartment, and while it was small, it was clean enough, and the price was perfect for my budget. I moved in a few days later. At first, everything was fine. Vanessa and I had our own routines. She'd leave for class in the morning, and I'd either work from home or go to campus for lectures. She kept to herself mostly, spending most of her time in her room. I respected that. I wasn't exactly looking for a new best friend. As long as we both paid rent on time and stayed out of each other's way, everything would be fine. The apartment wasn't the brightest. The windows were small, and the building's age meant there were constant creaks and groans in the walls, which only added to the sense of isolation I sometimes felt. The place had an eerie quietness, like something was always just out of reach. Faint sounds of pipes or the hum of old lights, but nothing definitive. Still, I didn't think much of it at first. One night, about a month into my stay, I came home from a late-night study session to find the door to Vanessa's room slightly ajar. I knocked lightly, but there was no response. Figuring she was just asleep or maybe in the bathroom, I went about my business, grabbing a snack and watching TV. The next day, I noticed the door was still open. Not wide, just cracked enough for me to see inside, but I didn't think anything of it. I'd seen her go out earlier, so I assumed she'd just left it that way and forgot. But that night, it happened again. Her door was slightly open when I came home, even though I was sure I had heard her leave earlier that evening. I knocked again, but once again, no answer. I couldn't shake the weird feeling that I was being watched. There was something strange about the way her door would be open, but she was never around. At some point, I started to feel uncomfortable in the apartment, especially when I was alone. It wasn't just the occasional strange noise or the weird door thing. It was the fact that there was something off about Vanessa. She had this strange energy, like she was always hovering just on the edge of something. And the longer I stayed, the more I began to notice odd behaviors. For one, she never seemed to be on her phone or interacting with anyone outside of class. She'd often come home from lectures, go straight to her room, and shut the door. The odd part wasn't that she was reclusive, it was that I rarely saw her leave her room for anything other than meals. She didn't seem to have friends. In fact, it seemed like she didn't really have anyone she interacted with outside of school. That didn't sit right with me, but I didn't push it. It wasn't my business. I started to get the feeling that I was intruding on her space. It was the little things. She would sometimes stare at me in the hallway for too long, her eyes blank and unfocused. And when she did speak, it was in an almost robotic tone, like her words were rehearsed. One evening, I came home from class to find a small package on the kitchen counter. It was addressed to Vanessa, and it had a return address from a city I didn't recognize. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I mentioned it to her later that night, her demeanor changed. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, staring at the package, her face pale. "Oh, it's just some old books I ordered," she finally said, her voice a little too shaky for something so simple. "Nothing to worry about." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A few days later, I came home to a different kind of silence. Vanessa's door was open again, but this time the air felt heavier, more oppressive. I didn't see her at first, but I could hear soft, rhythmic tapping, almost like a quiet knocking. It came from her room. I stood at the doorway, frozen for a moment, before knocking softly. When there was no response, I pushed the door open a little further. That's when I saw it. Her bed was empty, and the room was dark, except for a faint light coming from the corner. Vanessa was sitting there, on the floor, rocking back and forth. Her back was to me, and her hands were pressed tightly against her face. The sound I had heard was her tapping her fingers against her skull. "Vanessa?" I said, my voice shaking a little. She didn't respond. She didn't even move. I was about to turn and leave when she finally spoke in a low, hushed voice. Don't, don't look at the mirror." It was so sudden and so strange that it left me speechless for a moment. "What?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "Don't look at the mirror," she repeated, this time turning her head slightly, just enough for me to see her eyes. They were wide, bloodshot, the pupils almost too large. "It sees you." My heart raced, and a chill crawled down my spine. I backed away slowly, unsure of what to do, unsure if I should say anything or if I was overreacting. She stared at me for a moment longer, and then, just as quickly as it had started, she stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with her unsettling words. The mirror. I remembered the old mirror in the living room. It had always been there, large, ornate, and framed in dark wood. I had never thought anything of it until that moment. But after what Vanessa said, I couldn't help but wonder if it was somehow connected to what was happening to her. I had to know. That night, when the apartment was quiet, I stood in front of the mirror. It was like any other mirror, but something felt different when I looked at it. My reflection seemed a little too clear, too sharp. My face looked wrong, almost like I wasn't supposed to be there. I quickly turned away, feeling my pulse quicken. The next day, Vanessa wasn't home. I tried to go about my day as usual, but I couldn't stop thinking about her behavior. She had seemed almost possessed, as if something was using her body, manipulating her in some way. But what? And why? When she came back that evening, she was acting normal. Normal in the sense that she was eerily calm. She barely even glanced at me. But then she walked into the living room, stood in front of the mirror, and just stared at it. I felt my stomach twist as I watched her, standing there for what felt like hours, unmoving. Her reflection remained static, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Finally, she broke the silence. "It's not safe here anymore," she said, almost to herself, not turning around. "It's watching, always watching." Her words echoed in the back of my mind for the rest of the night. When I woke up the next morning, I found that she had packed all of her things and left without a trace. I never saw her again. The landlord told me later that she'd sent an email saying she was moving back home, but he didn't seem to know where exactly. I tried reaching out to her, but all of her contact information was gone. As for the apartment, I stayed for another month before I decided to leave. The mirror is still there in the same spot. Every time I pass it, I feel that familiar heavy gaze. I don't know what happened to Vanessa or what she meant by the mirror, but to this day, I can't bring myself to look into it again.
Story number 5.
It started when I moved into my first apartment after college. I just graduated and gotten a job offer in a city a few hours away from home. The job didn't pay much, and I was still choked by student loans, so finding a place cheap enough to afford was my top priority. I ended up in a shared 2-bedroom apartment just outside the city center with a guy named Marcus. I found the listing on a roommate matching app. The photos were a little blurry, and the apartment looked dated, but Marcus seemed normal enough. Early 30s, worked in IT, quiet, liked hiking and cooking. He messaged me in full sentences, didn't have any red flags, and said he mostly kept to himself. That was ideal for me. I wasn't looking for a new best friend, just someone to split the rent. When I moved in, Marcus helped me carry boxes up from my car and offered me a glass of water. He was a little awkward in person, soft-spoken, didn't really make eye contact, but polite. The apartment smelled faintly like old books and something stale, like wet carpet that had dried without ever being cleaned, but I chalked it up to the building being old. The place was furnished except for my bedroom, which I preferred. I could make it my own space. The first few weeks were fine. We exchanged small talk when our schedules overlapped, and I'd sometimes hear Marcus tapping away on a keyboard late at night. His room was at the end of the hall, mine closer to the front door, and there was a small shared bathroom between us. We had a loose agreement about cleaning schedules and groceries, and while he wasn't chatty, he wasn't a bad roommate. But then things started getting weird. It began with small things, lights turning off while I was still in the room, or coming home to find my bedroom door slightly ajar when I was sure I'd closed it. One night I woke up to the faint creak of floorboards outside my room, and when I opened the door, no one was there. I brushed it off. I brushed it off. It was an old building. The pipes clanged, the walls creaked, and sometimes the windows whistled when it was windy. One Friday night about a month in, I stayed in to catch up on emails and ended up working late into the night. Marcus hadn't come home from work yet, which was unusual. He was usually in by 6 or 7. Around midnight, I heard the front door open and close, but I didn't hear Marcus walk past my room or go into his. I waited a few minutes, thinking maybe he was grabbing something from the kitchen, but it stayed quiet. Eventually, I got up and peeked out. The living room was empty. Lights off. I checked the kitchen. Nothing. I walked down the hallway and noticed Marcus's door was cracked open, barely an inch. I knocked gently. No answer. I pushed it open just enough to glance inside. The room was empty. I stood there for a moment, heart thudding louder than it should have. I was just tired, I told myself. I must have imagined the door. Maybe I just heard someone in the hallway outside the apartment and assumed it was our door. I closed his door and went back to my room. The next morning, I asked him casually over breakfast what time he got home the night before. He looked confused. "Oh, I stayed at my girlfriend's last night," he said. "I sent you a text." He had, but I hadn't checked my phone. I nodded, trying to play it cool, but the weird feeling didn't go away. Things got stranger after that. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my bedroom door opening. Not creaking, opening, like someone had turned the knob slowly and pushed it open just enough to slip in. I bolted upright and flicked on my lamp. No one was there. The door was halfway open. I knew I'd closed it. I always did. I couldn't sleep with it open. I got up, checked the apartment. Marcus's door was shut, the light off. I didn't hear typing or movement. Everything seemed normal. But I couldn't shake the chill that crept down my spine as I climbed back into bed. I started locking my bedroom door at night after that. Then there was the smell. It started faint, like something rotting. At first I thought it was coming from the fridge. I did a full clean out, tossed some expired meat, old leftovers, but the smell stayed. It seemed strongest in the hallway outside Marcus's room. One weekend, while Marcus was out, I followed the smell to his door. It was locked. That wasn't unusual. He always kept it locked when he wasn't home. I crouched down and tried to sniff under the door. The stench was strong, like decay, sour, meaty, heavy. That night, I confronted him. "Hey, is something rotting in your room?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I've been smelling something bad the past few days." Marcus didn't look up from his plate. "Oh, yeah, I've been meaning to clean out my garbage can. I think some old food got stuck in the bottom." "Right," I said. "Maybe take care of it soon?" He just nodded. But the smell didn't go away. That same week, I noticed a new habit of his. He started locking the bathroom door for hours at a time, even when he wasn't inside. I tested it once, knocking a few times and trying the handle. No answer. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged. "I must have forgotten," he said. "Old habit, I guess." I didn't push it, but I started to get paranoid. I started keeping my phone on me at all times, and I put a small doorstop under my bedroom door at night, even with the lock. One night I came home late from work and found Marcus sitting in the dark living room. No lights on, just sitting there in the middle of the couch, staring straight ahead. "Hey," I said, surprised. "Everything okay?" He didn't answer at first. Then slowly, without looking at me, he said, "Did you ever hear the rats?" I froze. "What rats?" He finally turned to look at me. His face was pale, eyes sunken. "They live in the walls," he said. "They scratch and whisper. Sometimes I think they're not rats at all." I didn't know what to say. I laughed a little, trying to diffuse the tension. "Maybe we should call the landlord, get it checked out." Marcus just nodded slowly and got up, walking to his room without another word. That night, I didn't sleep. The worst part was I did start to hear scratching. Very faint, behind the walls in my room and the bathroom. But it wasn't consistent. It would come and go, always at night. And sometimes it sounded more like whispering than scratching. Too soft to make out the words, like someone muttering through the drywall. I thought I was losing my mind. One Saturday, I decided to clean. Like, deep clean. I opened all the kitchen cabinets, pulled out everything from under the sink, vacuumed behind the fridge. I needed to feel like I had control over something in that apartment. When I got to the hallway closet, the one between the bathroom and Marcus's room, I noticed the smell was stronger again. I opened the closet and gagged. Something was rotting. Behind the coats and boxes at the very back was a plastic bag. Tied up, dark stains blooming through the bottom. I grabbed a pair of gloves, pulled it out, and carried it straight to the dumpster behind the building. I didn't open it. I didn't want to know. That night, I heard Marcus pacing in the hallway. He walked back and forth slowly for what felt like hours. I didn't say anything. The next day, he was gone. His room was locked, but I noticed his shoes were still by the door and his keys were on the kitchen counter. He didn't come back that night or the next. On the third day, I knocked on his door. No answer. I called out, nothing. I finally called the landlord, who came by and opened the room with a master key. The smell hit us like a punch. The room was dark, curtains drawn tight, windows taped shut. There were black garbage bags stacked in the corner, duct taped shut. A computer sat on the desk, screen blank, but the tower still humming. And in the middle of the floor was a large metal cage. Inside it was a dead raccoon. The landlord cursed and stepped back. I stood there frozen, bile rising in my throat. Flies buzzed lazily in the heat of the room. On the walls were strange scribbles, words scratched into the paint with something sharp. They weren't in English. The police came. They found more dead animals in the bags, mutilated, some barely recognizable. In the closet was a journal full of Marcus's handwriting, increasingly erratic and illegible, pages filled with symbols and rambling paragraphs about the voice in the walls, the ritual, and the eyes behind the drywall. They never found Marcus. He vanished completely. No one at his job had seen him in weeks. His girlfriend said they broke up a month earlier. His phone was off, bank account untouched. It was like he dissolved into the walls. I moved out the next day, slept in my car for a week until I found a sublet. Sometimes when I'm alone in a new place, I still hear the faint scratching at night, or whispering I can't quite make out. I tell myself it's just the pipes. But deep down, I wonder if Marcus ever really left. Story the end.
Story number 6.
It was the fall of 2017 when I found myself in a position that almost every young adult goes through at some point, desperately needing a place to live after a roommate situation had gone south. I was 25, working as a night shift ICU nurse in Chicago, and my schedule made it difficult to meet people or keep regular hours. My lease had ended abruptly after my then roommate had a psychotic break. Not their fault, they got the help they needed, and I was scrambling to find a place I could move into fast. Between 12-hour shifts and emotional exhaustion, I didn't have time to be picky. I found a listing on Craigslist. Quiet, professional female looking for roommate to share 2BR apartment in Logan Square. $600 a month, utilities included. The ad was sparse, but not suspicious. I emailed the contact listed, someone named Marissa, and we arranged a viewing that weekend. Marissa opened the door when I arrived. She was in her early 30s, maybe, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and clothes that looked like she just walked out of a Banana Republic catalog. Very put together. Her apartment was clean and almost sterile, everything in its place, neutral tones, no decorations that suggested hobbies or personality. But the price was great, and I was desperate. I asked the usual questions: how the bills were handled, what her schedule was like, what the neighbors were like. She answered all of them politely but briefly. She said she worked as a legal transcriptionist from home, which explained why she preferred quiet. That was fine with me. I was usually gone at night anyway. She said the last roommate had left suddenly for a job in another state. I didn't get any weird vibes from her, though I remember thinking how little she blinked. We signed a month-to-month lease the next day. The first few weeks were uneventful. I was working 4 to 5 nights a week, coming home around 7 a.m. and crashing during the day. Marissa was quiet, always in her room with the door shut. Sometimes I'd hear her typing rapidly on her keyboard, sometimes not even that. She never had visitors, never got deliveries, and didn't watch TV. I don't think I ever saw her eat more than a protein bar or a cup of tea. I didn't mind. She was tidy, paid her share of the rent on time, and didn't ask questions. Honestly, it felt like the perfect setup until things started going missing. At first, it was little things: a pair of socks, a container of blueberries, my favorite pen. I assumed I was just misplacing them in my haze of sleep deprivation. Then it was more significant stuff. My nursing badge vanished from my work bag, and I tore the apartment apart looking for it. I found it 2 days later inside the silverware drawer. I chalked it up to exhaustion, but something about the placement felt deliberate, like it was supposed to confuse me. One night, after a double shift, I collapsed into bed and didn't wake up until nearly 5 p.m. I got up groggy, hungry, and noticed my bedroom door, which I always locked, was slightly ajar. My stomach turned. I always locked it. Always. I looked around, but nothing seemed missing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling someone had been in there. I confronted Marissa about it later that evening, trying not to sound accusatory. She blinked at me. "Why would I go into your room?" I didn't have an answer. Her face was blank, almost childlike, like I had just asked if she'd eaten my homework. She didn't get defensive. She just stared at me until I awkwardly apologized and backed away. After that, things started getting weird. I began waking up to strange noises in the night. My sleep schedule was always messed up, but I was sure I heard movement in the living room around 2 or 3 a.m. The creak of the couch, the soft rustle of something being moved. One night, I quietly crept to my door and listened. I heard whispering, low, rapid, like someone muttering to themselves. I cracked the door open and peeked out. The living room was dark, but the glow of Marissa's laptop lit up her face. She was sitting on the floor, her back straight, whispering to the screen. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her face was tense, not angry, focused. I stepped back and closed the door softly, heart pounding. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I acted like nothing happened. When I left for work, Marissa was making tea in the kitchen. She smiled at me, her usual tight-lipped practice smile, and said, "Sleep well?" I said yes. A few nights later, I came home early from work after a patient coded and I had a full-blown panic attack. I was drained, physically and emotionally, and just wanted to take a hot shower and cry in my room. When I walked in the door, I saw something that stopped me cold. My bedroom door was wide open, the lights were on, and Marissa was standing at my dresser, holding one of my necklaces. She froze when she saw me. I didn't say anything. My voice caught in my throat. She set the necklace down slowly and stepped away. "I thought you were working tonight," she said. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't even nervous. She just looked annoyed. I finally found my voice. "What are you doing in my room?" She looked at me like I'd asked a stupid question. "You said I could borrow it." "I never." I stopped. I knew I hadn't. She walked past me without another word and went into her room. I considered leaving right then and there, but it was almost 3 a.m. and I had nowhere to go. I locked my door, pushed a chair in front of it, and stayed up the rest of the night. The next morning, I called my brother and told him everything. He offered to come help me move out that weekend. The day before I was supposed to leave, I came home from work to find all my things packed up and sitting in the hallway. Every single thing. My clothes, my bedding, my dishes, even the stuff in my bathroom. All of it packed into boxes and bags. Marissa was sitting calmly on the couch, her laptop closed on her lap. "I thought I'd help you out," she said, smiling. "Don't come near me," I said. My voice was shaking. I just thought it would save time. I didn't respond. I called my brother and told him to come early. I grabbed an overnight bag and left to stay at a coworker's place. We came back the next morning with a U-Haul. Marissa didn't say a word. She just sat at the kitchen table, eating cereal and watching us. My brother tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but I could see how unsettled he was. As we were carrying out the last box, he looked at her and said, "You know, it's not normal to go through someone's room like that." Marissa looked at him with a strange smile. "She talks in her sleep, she said. My blood ran cold. She says things. Secrets, things I shouldn't know." I didn't look at her. I just walked out the door and didn't look back. A few months later, I ran into someone at work who lived a few blocks from that apartment. I casually asked if they knew anyone who'd lived there. They got quiet, then said, "Oh yeah, that place? There was a woman who lived there before. Super weird. She used to leave notes on people's doors. Creepy stuff like, 'I see you,' or 'Don't lie again.' I asked if it was Marissa. They nodded. She went by a different name back then, I think. Maria or something. I never reported her. I don't know what I would have said. She never hurt me, not physically, but I still wonder what she was really doing in my room, what she heard or thought she heard when I slept. I think about the way she packed my things, like she was trying to erase me from the apartment before I had even left. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and think I hear whispering outside my bedroom door. I know it's nothing. I live alone now. Locks on every window, cameras in the hallway. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'll find something in a drawer that doesn't belong to me. Like a button I've never seen before or a single earring. And then I remember what she said. She says things, secrets. I don't know how she knew, but she knew things she shouldn't have. Story the end.